Mutare used to host the Mutare board and paper mills. This was the only newsprint producer in the country. And the fact that we still use huge amounts of newsprint means that there is the opportunity and the potential to resuscitate such kind of industries. I think it's the responsibility of the local authority, frankly speaking, to go out there and say to investors, oh, by the way, come to our country. We have this opportunity. Nobody produces any newsprint in our country. So we're importing all the bond paper. We're importing all the newsprint that's used for the newspapers and any other industry that is consuming newsprint. It's for the local authority to design a package, to design a business proposal, and go and throw it on the table of potential investors. And investors are looking at those kind of approaches because they just have so many places to look at. They have so much choice. But one who makes the effort and goes to present an almost finished business proposal will make a huge impact. And I believe that local authority, the mayor, city councillors should be concerned and engaged in that kind of process that attracts investment into Mutare, because we are just as a city and a province endowed with the raw material required for this industry. And then we also look at the motor vehicle manufacturing sector. Because of the proximity to the port, all knockdown kits, all equipment that's required for assembly or manufacture of the vehicles in Zimbabwe, it would be so easy to then attract assembling of vehicles in Mutare for not just the domestic market, even for the regional market. Again, it requires some creative thinking by our city fathers, and something that I would do, to basically then say, let's target a company that's hungry to grow and expand into Africa. Let's give them land, let's give them incentives to come and set up in Mutare, because it's less than 3 hours from the port with containers that have spares and knockdown kits to the assembly plant. And we could do quite a lot in terms of the motor vehicle industry in Mutare. Actually, Mutare is a better place to have a vehicle industry than you would have with companies that are set up in Harare. And then the other area to consider is obviously resuscitating industries that were significant to the country, industries like the oil refinery. The infrastructure is already there to bring in the crude oil from wherever you think of into Beira and then into the pipeline. And Mutare, again, strategically located. There is basic infrastructure now dilapidated of what used to be Feruka. And that could be revived, because there is a huge benefit to the country in terms of reviving or resuscitating or setting afresh a crude oil refinery. The byproducts are huge. And if we consider the amount of fuel that we import and the amount of fertilizers that we import, the amount of plastics that we import, and then we look at the possibility of setting up a refinery in Mutare, I mean, the benefits far outweigh these huge costs that we're incurring by doing importation. We would only just import the crude oil, the rest is produced locally. Regarding some President Kabila paying some money to me, normally I would not, give credence to this kind of nonsense. But given the the kind of people on this platform and the utmost respect I have for them and for you, Tendai, as one who has facilitated this, let me respond respectfully by saying that it's absolutely nonsense. I don't know who started with that rumor that I lost my wife to Kabila. I was married in September of 1998, and my wedding was on the 5th of September, actually, 5th of September 1998. I've had no other wife since then, and I still am with the same wife today as I speak to you. She's never been married elsewhere except to me, and I've never been married elsewhere except to her. So this whole Kabila nonsense is just but nonsense. That company was introduced to me by the Ministry of Defense. They had already been working with the Ministry of Defense because the Ministry of Defense is an investment in telecommunications, and they had already been working with this company from South Africa, so they introduced it to me to say I could work with them to see and verify whether there had been any shenanigans in the $218 million project that had been awarded without going to tender. It was a NetOne project, a broadband project for expansion of its network. I got this company, they came in, I said, you know, as a ministry, as government, we don't have money for you to do this work. And they said, no, we will do it, and we will do it as a demonstration of our ability and capacity. And I said, fantastic. If that's what you want to do, put it all in writing. And they did put it all in writing. They would do it for free. They would not ask for any payment from government. They did all that. And I didn't approve. Even if they were coming in to do the work for free, I didn't take the decision myself. I went to the then vice president, who's now our president, and I said, there's this company, these are the terms. He was very happy, and he said, okay, but go to the president. I went to President Mugabe, I said, gave him the terms, and indeed, they were all happy, both of them, as my principals, were happy with the work I was doing. The company from South Africa did its investigations, discovered that out of the $218 million that the government of Zimbabwe was going to pay, equipment that had been received was just about $119 million. So which means another $100 million worth of equipment had not been delivered. And why had it not been delivered? Because actually there had been overpricing. The audit by this South African company discovered that items that were being sold to Telusel for 5,000 US were being sold to NetOne for 55,000 US. So all this was exposed, and we were exposing something that had not gone to tender. And I took all this work to my principals. My principals came back and said, oh, is this what has happened? Let's fight and get our money back. The long story is that I was able to negotiate a return of $30 million US. I think those who followed the issue, Tendai, with regards to the NetOne issues, those who followed the issues will know that there wasn't any issue between myself and Kangai, absolutely none. The fact of the matter, in a very short summary, is that when I was Minister of ICT, I conducted myself in the utmost of integrity. With the utmost of integrity, I handled my portfolio and my conduct in a manner that was beyond reproach. And that is why, despite a lot of efforts to try and throw dirt on me, none of that stuck. Because I was clean, I am clean, I've never taken any cent out of government. In fact, when I was government minister, I spent personal resources to support my government work. I had no car in government for quite a while, and I used my own personal car. We had no money for fuel, and I used my own personal fuel. I traveled with bodyguards, drivers who are government employees, and they had no money, no allowances. I accommodated them. I paid for their hotel bills. I paid for their food. And all this I did because I was serving. I was serving the country, and I was in a position to, thankfully, because I was coming from business. So I've never stolen any money or anything. The real issue, those that who have followed the case, was that when I was appointed, I came into a storm where there were issues of a tender that had been granted to a company from China at NetOne that was $218 million US worth. It wasn't a tender. The contract that had just been signed off without going to tender. And there were accusations by other companies that wanted to participate that it had been corruptly done. And I didn't want to have this mud, surrounding me. So what I did was I looked for people who were able to sort of look at this and make sure that I was starting on a clean set. a slate. And that's what happened. We got a company from South Africa that was happy to do so. There is no benevolence. You know, you have an important engagement. You have people waiting for you in Muzarabani. You put a requisition for fuel. Ministry of Finance has not yet released money for fuel because Treasury is saying avasati mari. So unongogara here vanhu vakaungana kumuzarabani. So it is that kind of thinking that we had to face to say, do we stop government work because takamira mari kubva kuMinistry of Finance? No, we didn't. We just did because we were able to. So don't ever think that people are able to do that because varikuba mari. Maybe you would do that, or maybe some would do that. But I can tell you from my point of view and why I did it was because I totally understand. I lost many relatives in the war for liberation, and they sacrificed with their lives. And sacrificing with $300 for a full tank of fuel to and from to the site of the event and accommodation and food for the guys wasn't such a huge sacrifice, wasn't such a huge loss, if you would call it a loss anyway. But by saying don't lift the sanctions, what you are simply saying is allow the Zimbabwean diamond trade to remain under the radar. And so there was no one to account. There was no accountability. So even as you say, no, then the former president said 15 billion had been stolen. Well, because of the people who were campaigning that Zimbabwean diamonds continue to be sanctioned and not to be sold openly. They must be sold by the way the country decided, because allowing them to go on the Kimberley is sanitizing those diamonds. The reality is that by blocking the country's diamonds being sold openly through the Kimberley process on the international market meant that those particular people were actually promoting the clandestine dealings of Zimbabwean diamonds. That is what any reasonable person must deduce from what was actually happening. We were given money by various companies, including diamond companies, as a donation to the AAG to support the efforts that we were doing. The suggestion that I was close to Obert Mpofu is ridiculous. Obert Mpofu was the Minister of Mines, and because we were dealing with a mines issue, there was absolutely no reason why we would avoid working with him. And I need to make a very important point that there's nothing wrong as Zimbabweans to work with anyone who has a government position. Whether you are ZANU-PF, whether you are MDC, whether you are NGO or whatever organization, it doesn't matter whether you agree or don't agree with the government. The fact of the matter is that anyone holding a government position has a responsibility to the country, and you ought to work with them to achieve your own ends. You can't achieve your ends as an NGO, as civil society, if you don't engage with those that are in the offices that have the power to make amends to their actions or to their policies, so that what you are saying can make sense. So aungati nindiri maguu and I can't work with that government, but I want them to follow these rules when it comes to extraction of minerals and this. They can't follow you because you have no time to engage with them. What is important is say, I don't agree with this government, but I would like to engage with the government in order for them to see things from my point of view. And you will be respected by that government, that even if you don't agree with them, you are happy to sit down and share your views. And you will find that the engagement becomes more constructive. Well, thank you very much for acknowledgement and the question. I continue to be the Member of Parliament for Nyanga South. My responsibility is to represent the people in Parliament. It is to represent the people in terms of being the conduit for development, being the link between the haves and the have-nots. Where the people say, we have no bridge, I find somebody who can help and donate a bridge. Where people say we have no computers for school, I find people who can donate computers or who can buy the computers for the school. That's my role, and I continue to play that role. But also, I have also used my resources, which I've been able to secure because of my business enterprises, to assist directly the community. I'll give you one example. I'm in the construction sector, so I have a fleet of graders, excavators, bulldozers, and other things. But I've committed one of my graders to just stay in my constituency to assist in rehabilitation of roads. And I work with the community in that I say, okay, I'm going to fix your roads, but you must provide my operator with food, accommodation, and you provide your fuel. I will provide my grader. And that work continues to take shape in my constituency. So it's part of the things that I do because I want to give back to those that invested in me as a community. First, as a young child who went up to school in a rural area, but secondly, as people who voted for me, not just once, but twice. Since 1980, when we got our independence, there's no member of parliament from Nyanga who has had 2 consecutive terms. I am the first one to have 2 consecutive terms. And that is simply because the people are giving me a vote of confidence because I also remember them and I do things for them and will continue to do so even when I'm no longer a member of parliament. Oh, it's also one of the lies that I got into government because I was connected to President Robert Mugabe. There was no such connection with President Robert Mugabe. What I know for a fact is that President Mugabe recognized my abilities and skills in the media, and that is why I was appointed Deputy Minister of Information. If it is true that I got into government because I was connected to President Robert Mugabe, you must then answer the question, why was I in government under President Emmerson Damuzio Mnangagwa? Because I was connected to him again? No. I believe that the leaders recognized what I could contribute in the national development, and I did my part in making those contributions. And I also believe that if people want to be honest, there are people who were related to President Robert Mugabe who were in government. And President Mugabe did not make it a secret that Patrick Joao is mwana wa hanzadzi yake. He didn't make a secret about that. So, you had people in government who were known to be relatives of President Mugabe. But don't speculate I was a relative of President Robert Mugabe. I wasn't. I was simply somebody here identified as somebody who could be capable to fill in a gap or an opportunity in his government that he wanted filled in at that particular point. The same reason that His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa appointed me to be Minister of ICT. He didn't consider me his relative. He just considered my abilities and my skills to the extent that they were relevant at that particular moment. Hansi, any presidential ambitions? Let me make it very clear that is structure mari tida kuto specialize more ku business than ku politics. Politics tango pinda kuti tisimudzire nyika kuti isadzoka ku vapambi vefu uko kune varidzi vekoko regai vaite zvavanoita vari ikoko tichivatsigira vari ikoko hakusiko kwatoda kunanga tida kunanga kubhegi. No, politics dzedu hadzina cash. Toda politics dzecash. I'm glad that you raised the issue of Binya Road. This is one of the most topical developmental issues in Nyanga South constituency, and I think to an extent in Nyanga North, because Binya Road connects Nyanga South and Nyanga North on the other side, which is from Mangondoza down to Nyatate, Nyautare, right up to Ruangwe. This road was almost being surfaced until Cyclone Idai came, and all the money that had been allocated for the surfacing was diverted to Cyclone Idai. Since then, with my arrest and problems then for the 2 years that I was going up and down in courts, the momentum suffered, and as a result, things really almost came to a standstill. But this is despite the fact that the bitumen, the stone had already been, brought on site, and it's actually still on site right now. Just last week, we had a provincial coordination committee meeting in Mutare, where I actually engaged with Mr. Seenza, who is the provincial development coordinator, to say, please, we need to prioritize that road because it's such an important road for so many communities and for the two constituencies. And that we had started working on this road, and we must never give our people an impression that we only pretend to be working on a project because the election is nearby. Because that's what happened with the Binya Road the last time. We're headed towards the elections, people were excited. Now we're almost 4 years into the new term, and we haven't finished that road. It leaves a sour taste in people's mouths, and we must never take people for granted that they will support us if we present to them projects that we don't finish. And I'm so glad that Mr. Seenza, the PDC, is very much concerned equally about the road. And I know the Minister of Transport, I've engaged the Deputy Minister, who's also the chairman for the province, and the Minister of Transport has expressed interest to actually come and visit and see for themselves and see what can be done, at least with the resources that have already been stockpiled that are on the ground. So I'm just as interested as you are probably to see to it that at least Binya Road is done. And I've always said it doesn't matter whether it's 5 kilometers, 30 kilometers, or the entire distance. 1 kilometer is progress. Let's do it. My views with regards to NetOne, should it be privatized? You see, my views are not very conventional in this regard. I don't believe that government should exit out of the telecoms space or the platform space, because I believe things that are far-reaching in terms of day-to-day people's lives must never be entirely in the private hands. So government must continue to be in the platform business, but in doing so, it must ensure that either it brings in partners who have competence to run or to put fresh money, but it must always continue to have a significant stake, significant ownership, because telecommunications will impact on our lives in a hugely significant way. Kwatirikwenda telecommunications is going to be a matter of life and death. The infrastructure is going to support health, support business, support the economy, support our day-to-day requirements. So you cannot allow the private sector to entirely control that sector. It will be very, very, very problematic. So I believe government must continue to hold a significant stake in NetOne, must invite private sector to participate or list it, but government must continue to hold a significant stake in NetOne, because you cannot leave space here telecoms entirely to the private sector. There has to be a public responsibility to make sure that there is no abuse, commercial abuse of the citizenry. There has to be somebody who counterbalances and offers services that are affordable by the generality of our population. That's a very good question. Why use personal resources when employed by government? This is what many Zimbabweans don't understand about the sacrifices that some politicians have had to make for this country to continue doing what it did under very difficult conditions. Civil servants were being paid, including ministers, including the president, were being paid $100 a month. That's significant sacrifice and contribution to the country. Now, if you're paid $100 a month, imagine what other costs you have and where you require money to do other things. You think a government that is paying you $100 a month will be able to pay you more money for fuel, $300 to just do one trip? So at the time where I used personal resources, things were very difficult in the government. Things were so tough. So people, not just me, other ministers were making personal sacrifices and contributions because things were very tough. So you would have to do it in order to allow the work to go on. Otherwise, you can't sit there and say, and expect that things will happen. No, you just have to do. But we didn't go out and sing about this. I'm happy to talk about it now because it's something that I did. But you know, when Zimbabweans look at you, say, they think you stole money, you came out with money. Nobody cares to think just for a moment, what was actually the situation of working in that environment? And what did you produce and what did you do? So at some point, government had things very, very difficult. And that's where we used our personal resources to make sure that things continue to tick. And there are many who sacrificed. There are many who died for this country. You can't ask them, why did you go and die? There are people who sacrificed in this country for their lives, for this country, with their lives. There are many who sacrificed. And they lived in this country with a lot of struggle. They were not paid for it. So what more in India and I'm able to resources, and what about those who paid with their life? So it is those kind of thoughts that must occupy every Zimbabwean wherever they are. I think that Telusel is a great asset, and that a government may have missed the opportunity to take advantage of this great asset. I think the vision that we had articulated at the time we did the transaction to secure and buy for government eventually 60% of Telusel, if it had been followed through, I think Telusel together with NetOne would be larger in terms of revenue and in terms of subscriber base services than anyone else in the market. The opportunity is still there, but I think that there are now various possibilities to either offload that to the private sector or to have government really focus on it. But from my observations, I don't think there is that interest. So the probably most probable way to go is to offload it to private sector and give people with the hunger and expertise in telecoms to take it to another level. I think Huawei is right in pushing for 5G connectivity. I think that we are ready for 5G. There's no point in investing in old technology. In fact, you'll be foolhardy to spend resources on old technology when the world has already moved on. Before we know it, the majority of handsets will be 5G and not 2G, 3G, or 4G. So I believe that it's a good push that we must go 5G. There's no reason why we should try and follow the chronological development of the mobile technology. If we can jump 4G or 4.5G and go straight to 5G, let's do it, because the benefits are immense. The investment is almost similar anyway, so there's no point in first building a 4G and then moving to 5G. I think the commercial dictates are such that we must just invest usually in the 5G technology that's now available. My biggest influencer, I really don't want to offend people by telling you who my biggest influence or came from, or who has influenced me the most. But let me tell you, outside of Zimbabwe, that I have admired the abilities of various leaders who are very clear about what they want and don't care about what you think, and will be focused on getting results. And I think for all his mistakes, his pomposity, his racism, Donald Trump was an exceptional guy. He was very clear that he didn't like black people, had no time for black people, but he was also very clear that he was wanting to achieve this, and he would make his way to make sure that he achieves what he wanted to achieve. What you see is what you got. He didn't pretend. So I find that I find certain elements or traits of that character very admirable, because we're in Africa, we're in Zimbabwe. Chinyamziwa so and tendera tiri panzvimbo imwe. Kana wangoda kuachieve something, just focus on it ukateerera vanhu kuti azodii umborivhesa woita sei hapana kwatoenda saka unongomananga wakananga nayo kusvika wasvika chete. I don't know which individual has more money than government. It is not possible to have an individual have more money than government. What is always possible is that government can make individuals rich. If you look at all the people who have made a lot of money in the world, they have made it because they work with their governments, or they work for their governments, or they get business from their governments, or they are facilitated by their governments. You must understand that some of the richest people in the world today are coming from the USA. Bill Gates is one of the richest people in the world. He sold products globally, and he's protected by the US government. US anti-piracy laws are huge, and they catch you anywhere in the world. They are not enforced by Bill Gates, they are enforced by the government of the USA for the benefit of Bill Gates. But if your question was related to I could spend personal resources to finance my travels when I was government minister, when government could not release money, I think the question is a little unfair in that I have explained the circumstances. Minister of Finance would have to release money to the Minister of ICT, and sometimes the money wouldn't be released on time, and yet we have commitments that we have made to communities where we want to visit, and we would not stop work. I have companies, by the way. I run businesses, and I would ask my businesses to please, can you give me some fuel? I want to do this. And that is what I was talking about in terms of I would use my resources. They were not personal resources in the context as you probably think, or perhaps I didn't express myself well. But the truth of the matter is I would ask my radio station, please, can you spare me 200 liters of fuel? I have a trip and we don't have money at the ministry. And they would be very gladly assist me to do that. It doesn't mean I have more money than government. It just means that I have a love and commitment to the people and the government that I serve. It is not true that my wife was related to the former First Lady, except that they all come from the same area of Chivu. So that is the connection. They're also related by the fact that they are all human beings. They all speak Shona as a language, and they are all Zimbabweans. Yeah, sorry, I was saying that the long story is that I was able to recover $30 million US. But of course, with a lot of hindsight, I realized I stepped on many people's toes. There would have been a lot of people who were benefiting from the $100 million that didn't eventually, find itself, benefiting NetOne. So all sorts of accusations were thrown at me. But the good thing is that I was a good record keeper. There was nothing I did in the ministry that I didn't keep a record of. So when it all came to court, I produced all the documents, and that's what saved the day for me. So I was obviously very clear that I'm not the one who stole here. I'm the one who caught the thief. So whatever you say or do, please always recognize that fact. So I'm not worried about a political dent because I'm not a political my career is not politics. I am not a career politician. People wanted to expose me as a criminal. They obviously didn't succeed because the truth eventually came out. So what happens with time is that people can make noises today. But what time does is that it exposes and reveals the truth. And I'm glad that time has exposed who really was the criminal, who really didn't do what was in the best interest of the people of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for the question regarding media plurality in that, what is my comment on the fact that Zimbabwe still just have one TV station. I think the fact that we still have one TV station demonstrates the failure of the economic environment to support multiple TV stations. I know for a fact that the government licensed 6 new players. We were one of the applicants that applied for that license. We lost, and we have no problems with that. But I know that those that have been licensed have been working really hard to set up television stations. But the economic environment is tough, eh? It's very, very difficult. This thing costs money. And you've got to justify the investment going in and the potential revenues that will come from advertising. This is not pay-per-view TV. And that's the biggest challenge we have. And with a lot of hindsight, I actually believe that it's not the kind of television that you want to set up today. Today, there's convergence between broadcasting and telecommunications. How many people are consuming the bulk of their news content on the TV set? Very few. The majority of people are consuming news content on their mobile phones, on their laptops, on their tablets, on their computers in the office. Not many people are watching on TV. So it means you roll out transmission infrastructure for television for a very small and dwindling audience when the real audience is on the mobile phone. So you need to then adapt a new approach to broadcasting that takes into account that this whole game has changed. The game has shifted. Yes, we must have multiple channels, but I don't believe we must have multiple TV channels. We must have multiple platforms that provide television entertainment. And to be honest with you, we already have them. How many channels are run by individual Zimbabweans on YouTube? And people are going on YouTube to get content. Now, what we simply need is those platforms, those channels being created as domestic channels that are offering that content. Nobody stopped today to run a music TV channel online. You can run a Zimbabwean focused music TV channel from wherever you are. Nobody stops you. But the reason that is not happening is that people haven't seen the commercial viability of it. So it's a shame that we don't have a lot of TV stations, but the reality is we can't have them because the business environment does not support. TV is big business, it costs money. Media is big business, it costs money. It has to be supported by a thriving economy that has industries and businesses spending money on advertising. And that is the biggest challenge. Government has done its part. They have licensed 6 new operators, and we are hoping very soon some of them will be online, and then we can, grow as we go there. It could have been done earlier. I certainly agree with you. Could have been done earlier, and that would have helped in commercial success during those early days when the convergence between telecoms and broadcasting wasn't as strong as it is today. We started the process when I was Deputy Minister of Information to open up the media sector by going out to do one of the best researched media papers that was led by Jeff Nyarota, veteran editor Jeff Nyarota, under the IMPI program, where they produced the IMPI report, which talked about what actually needs to be done in terms of democratizing information through the media in this country. And the results are there to see that people are not worried about we're not worried about multiple television stations. They're worried about access to even that one that has been in existence. Because you have in this country some parts of the country who have no access to Zimbabwean radio, who have no access to Zimbabwean television. They hear South African or Mozambican or Botswana radio stations. So people were more concerned about how do we get access to that which actually exists. So this bit is loaded with a lot of questions. Let me answer them stage by stage. What can be done to bring more efficiency and multiplicity in the media sector, particularly the broadcasting sector? I think that a lot has already been done. And I think that there's always confusion between politics and business. And it's so apparent in the media sector because it's a very sensitive area politically, but also one that is actually business. So there's always a blame game where people believe that government hasn't done enough to ensure that there is multiplicity, there is efficiency, there are more voices in the media. But most of all these things are a function of the business or economic environment. I know, for instance, that there were so many newspapers that were started by Zimbabwean entrepreneurs. Some were pro-government, some were anti-government, and those publications don't exist today. They were not closed down by government. They were closed down by the economic circumstances. So one has to ask, is the country capable of carrying many more publications, many more broadcasting stations, many more television stations? Is there economic activity that can sustain the existence of these media platforms? My answer is actually no. If you actually look at the telecommunications sector, why do we have 3 mobile networks and not 10? Why do we have only Delta beverages producing, clear beer in this country, and not many other breweries? One has to look at the size of the market and the potential of the market. I think in the broadcasting area, you've seen a number of television broadcasting licenses that have been issued. A number of those people are struggling to set up because the mathematics of it, when you now drill down to the numbers, and given what has happened in the economy and what's happening in the economy, you find that it may take longer than it is anticipated or they would have been proposed or planned to actually set up and recover the investment. So I don't believe that there's more that can be done. I think more can be done in growing the economy to allow more businesses to prosper, and particularly media businesses. Media businesses prosper from advertising, and advertising comes from companies, and companies do well in advertising when they're doing well in terms of selling their products. But of course, those dynamics are skewed at the moment. We're beginning to see an improvement, but the reality is that there's not enough advertising to go around to sustain a lot more television stations and a lot more radio stations. So a lot has been done so far, but allow the market to then now determine how much we require. Sometimes it doesn't need anyone to regulate. The market regulates itself. And I can tell you, given the example I've given you of newspapers, the market regulated itself. A lot of publications are out of the scene because they couldn't sustain. Yeah, the issue is that media institutions are churning out a lot of students in the media with media qualifications who eventually don't get jobs. But that's not unique to the media industry. It's unique to many other industries. There are many other people, other professions that are being created that don't have immediate jobs. But we can't stop creating this talent or educating this talent, because at some point we're going to require those skills. But more importantly, I think our country needs to understand that it is a big developer of HR, or human resource skills. And therefore, we must take advantage and export these skills in a more organized fashion, where we know we're sending so much of our teachers, so much of our nurses, so much of our journalists, so much of our copywriters to these kind of places. And I'm not talking about things that are difficult to implement. I mean, we just got to look at the models that have been developed by countries like Cuba. Cuba has been exporting teachers, Cuba has been exporting doctors, and governments that have been using these skills actually pay Cuba. The students or the teachers when they're here, or the doctors when they're here, they're paid a certain stipend, but a lot of the money is actually paid to Cuba. So I think we ought to continue developing the skills, but at the same time, we must find how to deploy these skills, not just within your own economy, but outside your economy, in an organized fashion that is government assisted, which gives rights, which gives status to those human resource skills when they are in those countries. And we as a country have done significant work in bringing about peace in DRC, in South Sudan, in Mozambique, and we have very many friends across the globe as a country where our skills, our educational qualities can actually be exported. So we need to look at things in that context. and perhaps not look at it as a negative that we have produced journalists, we have produced people qualified in media education who have no jobs. Let's understand that at some point we'll come out of all our challenges and those skills will become useful anyway. Thank you, Tendai, for the question with regards depoliticization of formal institutions. And you say that AB Communications, while privately owned, some people still feel it's controlled by the government. Well, frankly speaking, the premise of AB's existence, its radio stations, ZFM, FOE 98.4, is commercial. We run commercial radio stations. We went to apply for the licenses to run commercial radio stations. When we went to apply for a license, we were dismissed as, these are ZANU-PF apologists, they must not get a license, they're going to be running ZANU-PF propaganda, Supa is pro-government, please don't give him. None credence was given to my credentials as a media person, as a journalist. No one talked about my experience working for the Manica Post, working for the Business Herald, working for ZBC, working for SABC, working for Al Jazeera. Nobody spoke about that experience as somebody deserving of an opportunity to grow into the media industry in a bigger way. People just saw the politics. And I will accept that Zimbabweans will always never agree. I just saw a joke that was circulating that there's been research that has just been recently concluded that says there's actually nothing wrong in hearing opposing views. So I'm very happy to hear Zimbabweans say that we are pro-government, we have no balance. But if you actually look at our following in terms of our radio stations, we command some of the biggest audiences in this country and outside of the country. Then we can't be followed by those audiences if they think we are biased, if they think we have no objectivity, if they think we have no balance. I believe that, on a fair scale, we do very well, but we operate within an environment that we understand very well, that you ought to understand the commercial principles of existing in that environment. There is nothing wrong in anybody who is pro-government broadcasting in this country. There's absolutely nothing wrong with anybody who is pro-opposition broadcasting in this country. And that's why we have seen those who are pro-government, those who are anti-government, they all play in this media space in our country. As far as our approach is concerned, is give everybody an opportunity to air their views, to give their side of the story. That's the fairest thing to do. And that way you remain relevant, you remain relevant to your listeners, and your agenda is clear. Nobody can accuse you of doing anything that is untoward towards the profession. We have had interviews with leaders of the opposition here, leaders in government here, opposition parliamentarians, government ruling parliamentarians. We talk to everybody and anybody. Unfortunately, we can't be everything to everyone. So we accept that there are those who will not like us, and we can't do anything to change those people. And we can only do so much to please those that think we're doing something that is worth paying attention to. Tendai, thank you very much for the question about the diamonds and the campaign to have Zimbabwe's diamonds lifted from the sanctions or the Kimberley process sanctioning. You put this question in courts assuming it didn't come from you. Somebody who's afraid to ask that question has had to come through you as the administrator. First of all, the dishonesty of that person to not want to come straight and answer the question simply shows that there's some malice involved. Let me put the facts correctly. I was the president of the Affirmative Action Group. Tafazwa Msarara was Secretary General of the Affirmative Action Group. And one of the things that we did when Zimbabwe's diamonds were being blocked from being sold internationally because of the Kimberley process was that we went to the market to raise money in order to go on a global campaign to ask the world to allow Zimbabwean diamonds to be sold. The one thing that people miss is that when you allow a country to do things under the radar, as then was happening with our diamonds, was that you allow for a lot of crooked things to happen. But by campaigning to have Zimbabwean diamonds sold through the Kimberley process, an audited process with standards that are agreed to by member countries of the Kimberley process, we were actually fighting for transparency in the trade of Zimbabwean diamonds. We had people like Magu, he's probably the one who asked this question. We had people like Magu who were opposed to our work. But in actual fact, we were campaigning that Zimbabwe's diamonds be accepted under the Kimberley process, because then Kimberley process would send monitors, would send all those kind of people to make sure that things are being done above board. But there were people, naively, I would imagine, who would say, no, don't lift the sanctions. But by cybersecurity, I think it's a good thing. I think everybody is battling with a lot of cyber-related crimes, and we have no laws in our country to deal with some of these challenges. These are new challenges posed by new technologies that were never envisaged when the laws were being made. So a law that addresses some of those challenges is very important. So it must be supported, it must be encouraged. We must make sure that we remove the politics away from that law, because there's a lot of quick accusations. Oh, government wants to control what people say. No, they want to control thieves that steal your money. They want to control people who hack into your phone. They want to control people who engage themselves in revenge pornography. So there's more to cybersecurity laws than the politics. And for Zimbabwe, I mean, if we spend a little more time in understanding what's good for us, we will find that a lot of the things that are done by government are so good. But we just make them so political that we then don't see the good of those things. And that's what derails a country. And everybody asks, but the district progress is it's because we focus on things that are not important sometimes. But I think that sometimes the focus is important. We must point out things that are wrong. We must point out things that could be used excessively, or that could be a basis for abuse of power. There's nothing wrong with that. And government welcomes those kind of things. And I think it's important to do so. But we must not be blinded about what is good and ultimately what is intended for some of these laws. In my view, we need laws that deal with the criminality around cyber. What is my legacy during my time as the Minister of ICT? I think that legacy is a thing that is not defined by those who were at the forefront, but by those who followed, or those who benefited or who lost from my tenure as the Minister of ICT. And I think Dennis is one of the players. You may talk about my failures and my successes, but if you asked me what I thought was significant that I pushed for, I'd say the issue of infrastructure sharing was one of the significant issues that I really pushed hard for, and made sure that it happened for the benefit of the country, because I found it quite awkward that on one mountain you'd have 3 towers that have 3 security guards, 3 generators, and all made out of imported steel coming from outside our country, when we had a huge shortage of foreign currency, whereas one tower could be shared by the 3 operators. So I introduced infrastructure sharing as a policy, and today I think there's quite significant benefit from cost point of view for the consumer, but also for the operators, because then it reduces capital outlay. I think that we introduced a policy that insisted on a certain percentage of business being granted to the locals. For instance, if Zimbabweans paid attention to things that matter the most, the policy we introduced, the ICT policy we introduced, was that we are importing a lot of software, SAP and all these kind of softwares that are coming into the country. We must develop our own software industry. So we made it a policy that for every purchase of $1, 30 cents must be spent on buying local software developed by Zimbabweans. And that is part of the policy I ensured that we implement. And I also was very pro young development, young developers. And we made sure that we introduced an innovation fund funded by Portras to make sure that we develop an industry out of the innovation for young people coming out of universities and colleges. And we were giving them funds. And I'm very happy that we took some of them to South Korea, and they won against global innovations as a result of having created a fund to fund such kind of innovations. So, I could go on about many things I think that were quite significant that I introduced, which include telemedicine. But I think that it is for those who are in the sector and others to judge me, and not for myself to judge myself. Okay, I don't necessarily have to take off my political hat in order to answer the question. What advice should I give to the political players and the leadership? I think the first important thing is to acknowledge the fact that at the end of the day, we're all Zimbabweans. And I think we wish the same things for the country. But what we differ, or where we differ, is how to achieve those things. And to acknowledge that none of us is perfect, and that every one of us will make mistakes, and it is okay for other people to point out those mistakes. And that when we point out those mistakes, we need to do it respectfully, so that our advice is listened to, so that our advice is taken more seriously, and it must not be to disparage. It must be to, we will assist you, listen to us. So my advice is that it is good to have an opposition. It is very good to have a strong opposition, because it keeps the ruling party on his toes. But the opposition must be loyal to the country. The opposition must drive the agenda for the country. It must never be under the influence of anybody else other than themselves and Zimbabweans and their supporters. And the ruling party must always be ready to listen to criticism, discard that which does not make sense, that which is childish, that which is just to oppose, and accept and take wholeheartedly that which is progressive. And I think that President Mnangagwa has demonstrated just this trait of leadership by having that forum where the political actors, the Pollard Forum, where political actors come together to criticize, to oppose, to say, well, this law is giving you an unfair advantage. Can we look at reviewing it? It's such a majestic thing that the president has done. But I think if we look at things in a manner and a way that always is about opposing, we miss the opportunity of the good things. And I think Pollard is a good thing, because you can achieve a whole lot more by people sitting down together. And I want to give you one example. When President Mugabe and former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai, then as opposition leader, sat down to negotiate the inclusive government, I mean, there was anger across the political divide. There was like no acceptance across the political divide. Kuti we can sit down one with ZANU-PF, or we can sit down one with MDC. Kuti Mugabe angagara pasina Tsvangirai vatomwa tivese. But I think the country was able to achieve a whole lot more because the two leaders found each other, and it made the country succeed in many respects. So I think that my advice would be, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel. It's happened before. And these things are not difficult to do. We just must take away our pride. And the Galactic politics, the cash, politics doesn't matter if people are successful, if the economy is firing on all ends. Nobody is interested in politics. Kana vanhu vakaguta. Nyaya dzenzara ndo dzokonzera politics. So opportunity haisi kupolitics, opportunity iri kumari kupedza nzara ine vanhu. So we see opportunities. I see more opportunities in business, in resolving what some see as the economic problems. The economic problems require economic solutions, and that's where the business opportunity is, and that's where the business opportunities lie. So ndokwatikumanya tiri ikoko and tiramba tingori ikoko. Tendai, thanks very much for asking about our business. Our business, so we've got a company called AB Communications. AB Communications owns 100% ZFM stereo, my station, your station. It's a nationwide radio station broadcasting from Harare. We also own a provincial regional radio station in Masvingo called Hevoi, broadcasting to the Masvingo province. We also own a 98.4 Midlands FM, which is broadcasting in the Midlands. We own a business newspaper modeled along the same lines as the Financial Times called Business Times. We own a printing press for that newspaper. And then we own a TV production company called Mighty Movies. And then we own an outdoor advertising outfit called Truck Ads. Basically, we have moving ads, and we can activate product launches with those kind of trucks where we open into stages and do a performance, and then we wrap it all up in a few minutes and it's a truck and it's on the road. So that's basically our media group. We are working on other various initiatives, and in due course we should be able to unveil them. Obviously adjusting and understanding the new opportunities that are being offered by the pandemic, and also being offered by the convergence that I spoke about earlier between telecommunications and broadcasting services. I suppose this question about whether it is procedural to keep government records at their houses is correct. I think that when you take government records and keep it at your house, it's definitely unprocedural. It's not acceptable even by government rules, and I'm not sure that there's anybody who does that. But if you are referring to the answer I gave earlier, in which I said there is nothing I did which I did not keep a record of. Something that I did, if I wrote a letter, it's got my ownership, it's got my signature. I kept a record of it. So it was important to keep records of everything that I did, because records are important for tomorrow. So when people write their memoirs, they use those kind of records. So please let me make it very clear that I was able to keep a record of every step I took in government. If I was having a meeting, I kept the record of that meeting. If I was giving an instruction, I kept a record of that instruction. Now, I would think that proper management requires that anybody keeps a record of what they do. And that's exactly what I did. And of course, you know what? It actually helped me when I was being prosecuted, because I was able to prove that all these things are not correct. This is actually what happened. And if I didn't have that record, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation with you. So I'm very grateful that I was able to think like that. In terms of having a regional station in Manicaland, I don't think the opportunity exists anymore. The operator of a regional radio station there is Diamond FM, which is owned by Zim Papers, and they're doing a great job there actually. So I don't think there's any more space from a licensing point of view, number one. Number two, I believe that Diamond is doing a fantastic job. They're covering the province very, very, very well. I think that if we wanted to introduce competition to Diamond, we would use ZFM because it is a national radio station. But I think that from a regional commercial radio station perspective, Zim Papers has done very well with Diamond FM. Indeed, I missed this question, and thank you very much for that. You're asking what could have been better during my tenure as ICT minister. During the time that I was, actively running the show there. I think what could have been better, there's so many things that could have been better. I mean, the biggest room in the world is room for improvement. I think we started with the computerization of schools. well, we didn't really start. It's something that had been going on. But I think that if we had done a much more robust deployment of telecommunications infrastructure to schools, if we had supported Tel1, Liquid, Mutande, and other companies to deploy significant fiber across the country, significant fiber into high density areas, we would have really done ourselves a huge service. And the advent of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, the effects would have been less felt in our education sector had we, during my time, been able to invest significantly in infrastructure, in the deployment of fiber to the home. We had this project, but the resources weren't enough. But I think we could have focused more on it, and we would have found the resources if we had paid so much more attention to it. And it would have helped us in dealing with the generation we have that have had 2 years of schooling so much interrupted that we probably didn't get the best value out of our education system in the last 2 years, unless you had children, or for the children who are the privileged, schools that have been offering online education. And I think that's my biggest regret. We didn't do enough. I mean, it's said, we've had these kids not go to school for almost a year. They go for a month and the situation gets worse. We have to lock down, and they've had to go just to go and learn for a few weeks and then write exams. We could have done better for ourselves. I hear you, Sachina Masa, on what I should have said. But if I had said what you're saying, it would have been a political answer. So I'm giving you a very genuine discussion answer. And really, to be honest with you, that's not where my focus is. My focus is on creating a business empire that supports the political leadership of our country. Okay, thank you. I don't know. I didn't realize there was a question around Z Judgment Yard. I think Z Judgment Yard is just is a show on ZFM every Thursday from 9 p.m. to midnight, which is focused on Zim dancehall music. So what we did was Judgment Yard was an outfit that had been created much earlier than ZFM stereo. But when we were looking for talent and looking for people to promote using the platform of radio, I identified Judgment Yard as a group, an outfit that would have a huge potential. But we needed to distinguish the Judgment Yard yeku Red Fox ne Judgment Yard yepa radio. So the radio Judgment Yard was Z Judgment Yard, Z for ZFM Judgment Yard. So we catapulted the outfit from just being club DJs who were doing my CDs or Chikanda all over the show, and to a global movement, because then they were doing shows in Dubai, they were doing shows in London, they were doing shows in South Africa, and that's the important thing about radio, is that it gives opportunity to our people, to our artists, to build their names, to build their brands, to be more creative, and they go global. And that's what radio must do. It must promote local, it must promote Zimbabwean. And we're very proud with the work that Z Judgment Yard has done in order to promote Zim dancehall music, and it has become hugely successful. Do I own Z Judgment Yard? No, to the extent that they are just a brand on ZFM. I don't own it. Judgment Yard was an outfit created by other people, still there. But once it is on radio, it's Z Judgment Yard, and we support what they do. We support what they do on air and outside of radio. Tendai, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to all the participants and all the group members that took part in the discussion. I enjoyed the conversation. I must apologize to anyone I offended, because the intention was not to offend, but I gave you my honest truth, and I hope you can live with it, because we don't have to be the same and we don't have to believe the same. We have to be different, and that's what makes us stronger, because then we have different views, and different views always help to shape a better country for ourselves. We all have a responsibility to do well for our families, for our country. So I want to just encourage everybody that let's do all our bit that we can do within our own spaces. Good night to everyone. Have a wonderful evening and have a very good weekend. Once again, thank you so much for tolerating me and tolerating my views. I really appreciate it. Tendai, once again, thank you so much and God bless. All right, Tendai, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I think there is always a misrepresentation on the social media front, Wikipedia in particular. I really was never born in Sakuva. I was actually born in Nyanga. So I grew up in Nyanga. I did my primary education in Nyanga. I only moved to Mutare to do my secondary education in Dangamvura. I've never lived in Sakuva. So it's a misrepresentation that I actually grew up in Sakuva, or the suggestion made on Wikipedia and other platforms that I have some connection to Sakuva. I absolutely have no connection to Sakuva, except that as somebody who grew up, from secondary school to working life in Mutare, I was, familiar with the place. So I represent Nyanga in the House of Assembly because that is where I was born. That's where I grew up. That's where I have all my roots. So, in a nutshell, I represent where I was born. In terms of, if I was a mayor of Mutare and I represent Mutare, I don't know whether that question continues to be relevant, given the fact that I have outlined that I have no connection to Sakuva. But I think that, you asked me as somebody who grew up in Mutare, somebody who grew up, passing through Sakuva almost on a daily basis and going to Sakuva to watch football at Sakuva Stadium and do many other things. I really think that, Mutare offers a huge opportunity. And I think that we do require some vision there that enables the city to take advantage of the fact that it is the eastern gateway to the port. If you actually look at the distance between Harare and Beira, compared to the distance between Harare and Durban, you'll find that Beira is very, very close. What that means is that Mutare could position itself as a place, as a transit place for a lot of trade between Zimbabwe and the rest of the world, particularly that which uses rail to the port, road transport to the port, and we could have a lot of industries around international trade in Mutare for that purpose. Also, more importantly, I think that Mutare is a beautiful city, has sort of killed its tourism potential by overdevelopment, or development that hasn't taken into account the possibility of going upwards, building apartments, high-rise buildings for accommodation. And it's been utilizing all the space around it, taking away the beauty that was associated with the Mutare. So I think that there would be need for some creative and innovative thinking within the local authority, within the city council. And I probably would look at that and see how that can be done. And I think that Mutare, it's a shame that Zimbabwe imports a lot of furniture from many places of the world, particularly China, and you find that the Chinese are interested in our pine tree timber that's coming from Mutare to ship to China so that they can make the furniture. I think with the right city fathers, Mutare would be able to attract investment by offering incentives to those that want to come into manufacturing of furniture and other timber-related products, because that is the only place in the country where you can get huge plantations of timber, that kind of timber, which is not the the other timber we get in Matabeleland. So I think that our city fathers would do very well to make land available, incentives available, to make sure that there is an attraction of investment in this area. Tendai, you say that I'm one of the media players who have become wildly successful. I'm not sure I've been wildly successful, but I'm grateful for what I've been able to achieve. But I also believe that there are many journalists who have also been able to do very well in their lives, and some names that come to mind. Edwin Moyo is one of them. Edwin Moyo is a very, very successful global entrepreneur. James Makamba, again, a very successful entrepreneur. But of course, sometimes people have a short memory and they sort of recognize me, and I appreciate, but I think I also must acknowledge the other professionals who have, who started in the media game. I think, the desire for success is individually best. People just come out of any environment that they are in based on their own effort and their own desires. And I think that the media in this country has been very unkind to its professionals, because there hasn't been any development training that is sort of fostered by the Union of Journalists or by the industry itself. It's an industry which, if you're not too careful, you get drowned in, because things happen very easily and you've got a status that you are just accorded simply by being a journalist. But when you're on your own and you don't have an employer, that status vanishes and disappears sometimes. And I think it's important and imperative, I think, that the media industry begin to develop its own and say, how do we grow journalists beyond the newsroom? The same way we have a crisis in football, where we have superstars who've done very well in our country, played very great football, some at international level, some in the EPL, but down the line they have nothing to show for it. Not because they didn't earn money, not because they didn't work hard, but certainly because they failed to manage either their fame, they failed to manage the exposure they got. So I think that a lot could be done in helping the industry and in the training, particularly for people to understand that it's a profession that can consume you, but at the same time don't allow yourself to be consumed. Sizani, thank you so much for the question regarding whether the agenda for international news coverage is determined by the local correspondents, or there's a bigger agenda by the media institutions and the countries from where they are hosted. I think, let me give you my perspective. I worked for Al Jazeera. I worked for SABC. I also had a stint with BBC World Service Radio when I was studying, when I just finished studying my master's in the UK. And also to clarify, I was not on internship. I actually applied for a job. They advertised for jobs at the BBC Africa Service. I applied, and I was invited for interviews, and I then didn't turn up for those interviews, but they looked for me. Robin White, who was head of BBC World Service Africa, looked for me and said, "You didn't come for your interviews." I went and they interviewed me, and they offered me a job to this extent, or to the duration of my my visa when I was there as a master's student. So my experience in terms of who determines the agenda, first of all, and then very unfortunately, Zimbabweans, when I talk about myself and the other guys who have had the opportunity of being international correspondents, lacked the self-esteem of understanding that they control the story. It is their story. And there's always and was always a desperation to cover the country the same way a British Sky correspondent was covering. There was also a desperation to become a global superstar journalist by lambasting your own country or your own people. And that desperation continues to be there in the media, where local correspondents believe in order to be good or in order to be recognized by the editors sitting in London or in Joburg or anywhere else in the world, you ought to find some very negative things to say, either about your leaders or about your political parties or about your society. So there's always this desperation to say something negative. And yet, those newsrooms can actually listen to you if you present the story and say, no, the way you perceive this story is different. And I'll give you a very classic example. I was doing a report for Al Jazeera, and the war veterans, Chino Timba and others, had just given a press conference at the HICC. I was the correspondent for Al Jazeera, and the way it works is that you do your story, you send the script. In this particular case, I sent my script to Doha, and then the guys would then look at the script, ask you questions or change where they feel you need to change. And then the script came back, and they were describing the war veterans as violent, as Mugabe's thugs and stuff. And I said, I refused to do that script. I said, no, I will not read that kind of stuff. Remove that bit, because I'm not going to describe the war veterans as violent thugs and Mugabe's thugs. First of all, these are the guys who liberated our country. So I cannot describe them as that. That they have a different view from what you are perceiving to be the status quo must not be the reason why you should describe them in such disparaging way. And I carried the day, and they removed it. So when I reported for Al Jazeera, I was not apologetic. First of all, Al Jazeera looked for me. I didn't look for a job at Al Jazeera. So I reported the way I wanted. The second example I want to give you is that we had just had an election in this country. BBC, Sky, I don't know who else were running with stories that Mugabe had been defeated by Morgan Tsvangirai. Mugabe had just left the country. He was on his way to Malaysia to seek asylum. And I had phones ringing from New York, from London, from Doha, asking me, why am I not running with this story? Because all the other major networks have that story. I said, I know the Zimbabwe story, and I can tell you that Mugabe is not on a plane to Malaysia. He is in the country. He's still firmly in charge of the country. I mean, whether those outside like it or not, that is the current situation. And everybody almost locked me out because they were saying, no, I'm being partisan in my reporting. The following day, and I've kept some of the emails, I was receiving emails from editors in London and in New York to say, well done for keeping your head, because the pressure was on for you to go on live and lie. And because it became very apparent that Mugabe had not gone to Malaysia and he was around. So there's always pressure, and if you don't sustain, if you are not strong enough to hold on to your position, you can actually go and get lost. Then, on the other hand, I think there's always some connivance. It's not actually discussed. You can see some connivance to cover a story in a certain way. You will find that Sky, BBC, Channel 4 will cover a story same angle. Only Al Jazeera provided a different angle, so you'd understand stories from a different angle. But of course, the locals are always under pressure to then follow the trend that has been established by Reuters, APTN, or Sky. So that's what I would say with regards to the coverage. I really consider myself to have been honored to work as a government minister, as a cabinet minister under President Robert Mugabe and then under President Emerson Mnangagwa. I think it's a rare opportunity for many young people like myself to have had the experience and the one-on-one interaction with the leadership of our country. And I believe that in my experience, in my engagements, I have learned a significant lot, a lot of things that the public there would never understand, would never know about the caliber and the determination and the commitment of those leaders to this country and the development of the black person in this country. So I'm privileged and I'm honored to have served under President Robert Mugabe and to have served under President Emerson Damudza Mnangagwa. And I'm glad today that I continue to serve under the leadership of President Mnangagwa, not as a cabinet minister, but as a Zimbabwean entrepreneur who believes that his message that we must be successful as a country, we must turn around things, and that we are open for business needs to be transformed into action. He has given the platform, the opportunity for people to stand up and be counted entrepreneurially, and I'm one of those who's serving under his direction that we are open for business. Let's do business.